The BloodStream Podcast, episode 37, is brought to you by our presenting sponsor, Takeda. And for that we say, thanks Takeda. Hello, and welcome to the BloodStream Podcast, episode 37, June 17th, 2019. I'm Patrick James Lynch.
And I'm Natalie Lynch.
On this episode, clotting factors. Aren't they basically all the same? We break down Paul Clement's informative and clarifying article from the May issue of LA Kelly Communications Parent Empowerment Newsletter, commonly referred to as PEN, during our comments segment. We discuss a physician recruiting an army of doctors, nurses, and other health professionals to tear down the, quote, fake health news during our like segment. Tabitha White shares her story of becoming a hemo mom after losing her own hemo dad to AIDS in our share segment. Plus, European Hemophilia Consortium Chief Executive Officer Amanda Bach joins us for today's interview segment. And while that would be enough content for most podcasts, not for BloodStream, you'll also hear from Debbie De La Riva with a Moment for Mental Health segment, and you'll get the latest recommendations on what to stream on your downtime in Mama Sue's Netflix Recs. All that and more coming up on this episode. Welcome to BloodStream. Welcome to BloodStream, Natalie.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I just thought someone should do it.
I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited to be here every month.
Yeah.
But
I wonder if listeners actually realize how much of our time together every month has to do with BloodStream, like actually being physically together, because we're not as together as often as people might think.
No, it's kind of a large proportion of our time, our concentrated time, one-on-one time.
And as you know, I was saying to you recently, I would like to maybe find a way that we can record remotely a little bit more fluidly in the future.
So that we can save like time together for leisure activities.
Not that we don't love doing the podcast. We're recording right now, Natalie. Don't let them know we do other things other than this.
Yeah, but this isn't leisure time.
No, it's not leisure time. That is correct. We got a lot of housekeeping, so I should get to that.
Get started.
So, as always, we like to tell you what's on Ask the Expert. So the latest episode of the Ask the Expert podcast with host Amy Board features Dana Merritt. She's a chronic disease social worker with over 50 years experience counseling the parents of children with serious chronic medical conditions. Ton of experience. Dana's the creator and founder of Parents Empowering Parents, PEP, a decades-long parenting program for the bleeding disorders community, and Energizing and Empowering Minds, a nonprofit with a mission of helping parents be parents and kids be kids in spite of their medical challenges.
What a wonderful thing.
Yeah, great, a great mission, a ton of experience. So check that out over at the Ask the Expert podcast, bloodstreamexpert.com. The Teen Impact Awards, you've been hearing us talk about this for a little bit now. The bleeding disorders community's largest program that honors and celebrates teens affected by bleeding disorders. That's patients, siblings of patients, and children of patients who are making a positive impact in their home, school, or community, is accepting nominations of inspiring community teens for the 2019 program. Nominations for the 5th annual Teen Impact Awards are open now, but close on Friday, June 28th.
That's so soon.
Friday, June 28th. Honorees will be recognized at, and those who are present will be on stage during, the 5th annual Teen Impact Awards, taking place on the opening night of National Hemophilia Foundation's Bleeding Disorders Conference, the BDC, in Anaheim on Thursday, October 3rd. So if you know a teen affected by a bleeding disorder who is worthy of this honor, head over to teenimpactawards.com to nominate him or her today. Natalie, you got some nominations that you're going to be making for the Teen Impact Awards this year?
Well, I'm not going to announce them.
I'm not asking you to announce them. I'm just asking you, are you making them?
I think I am, actually.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
All right. Wait, would you have something else?
Well, I have to do it this week.
Well, yeah, because you know when they close?
The 28th.
June 28th, that's right.
So I got to get on it.
Get them in there.
I'm going to put it in my bullet journal.
You two out there, parents, executive directors, nurses, social workers, all y'all. June 28th, let's recognize these teens. Last year we recognized 70 teens affected by bleeding disorders.
That's incredible.
And I have to say, we get incredible feedback too from what this moment in time means for these individuals and their families. That's why we've done it for 4 consecutive years. That's why we put as much into it as we do. Much of it isn't seen. It's behind the scenes stuff. It takes a lot of work, but it's worth it because this truly has a great impact on the people who we're honoring for the impact they're making. So if you do know of someone who would be worthy of this honor, take a couple of minutes, nominate them. You never know. It could have a greater impact on their life than you would ever imagine.
Yeah. Last year at the conference, someone I had met in the exhibit hall, a teen I had met, referenced in saying who they were, that they were an honoree, which was pretty cool.
That's how they identified their presence at the conference. Hi, I'm here as a Teen Impact Award honoree.
Which
That's
was
amazing.
Pretty amazing.
Well, and I've gotten, from the highest levels at NHF that they attribute the Teen Impact Awards in part to the growth of the teen presence at the conference in the last 5 years. So that's also a very cool thing that I'm quite proud of. So let's keep it going. Nominate some teens that are doing cool stuff. Stop the Bleeding.
Woo!
Season 9 is officially in the can, which means that we shot all the stuff, which is crazy. This season, Spencer and Benny, along with Dr. Young and Nurse Jamie, travel down to Villahermosa, Mexico, where they are twinned with the local hemophilia treatment center and assist the local patient community with developing an advocacy society. This is the first time Stop the Bleeding has really explored hemophilia and bleeding disorders care outside the U.S., and we crafted this year's storyline in consultation with advocacy and clinical leaders from the Mexican hemophilia community. The episodes are going to be released in English later this summer, 10 episodes, and then released in Spanish in the early fall. So stay tuned for more details, or you can visit stbhemo.com to learn more. STB Season 9 coming out. All right, a little bit more housekeeping. I told you there's a lot this month. There's a few updates to investigational drugs. Investigational drugs mean those that are in clinical trials. But in a couple of weeks at the ISTH meeting, that's the International Society on Thrombosis and Hemostasis, it's taking place in Australia this year. Did you like that little voice I did?
Well, I mean, you highlighted that it's the spelling that I hate.
That's true. Don't bring this up again.
Yeah, I'm going to get another Twitter war going.
HAEMO. There's going to be numerous data presentations during ISTH. It's one of the big 5 meetings of the year. So I'm going to take it upon myself to do a little bit of homework. When that meeting ends, I'll take a look at kind of the big data presentations that have come out of that, and the team here will put together a little segment or something for next month. So I'm not going to get into any of those updates because there's going to be more of them next month. 2 really cool pieces of information from the WFH. We talk a lot about the WFH and their work. We've announced recently some of the announcements they've had about new partners joining their humanitarian aid program, and we've got another announcement along those lines. The
What
WFH, thanks, Natalie. Humanitarian aid program welcomes Bayer as its latest manufacturing partner, as Bayer has committed to providing training, education, and 50 million international units of factor over the next 5 years to the WFH program, which serves more than 60 developing countries. So thank you, Bayer, for that commitment. Also, a new collaboration between St. Jude's Research Hospital and the WFH is aimed at helping bleeding disorders patients in countries where they may not receive regular treatment in a pretty innovative way. So this partnership is a centerpiece of a program that's going to conduct a gene therapy clinical trial in low and middle income nations for the treatment of severe hemophilia B. The trial will include adult and older adolescent hemophilia B patients and will use a new gene therapy that's being produced jointly by St. Jude and the University College London.
Hey.
So that's a pretty, there's actually a lot to unpack there. My big takeaway, people who would otherwise not have an opportunity for potential life-sustaining, life-changing access to the most advanced medication probably possible in the coming years, right? This is an opportunity to get it to them. So I think this is brilliant. But it also brings up questions about, wait a minute, are we trying experimental drugs on people in developing countries? That seems a little, there's some ethical stuff to talk about there, but we don't have time for that now. So we're going to just keep on moving. But take a look at that. You can, there's an article in Hemophilia News today, and if you just Google St. Jude's WFH, you can read more about this announcement. Rolling right along. Regular listeners to the pod will recall our episode 34 guest, Robert C. Cooper, a TV producer and writer living with hemophilia, who created Unspeakable, the new Sundance TV miniseries capturing the blood contamination crisis from that Canadian perspective. Well, I'm pleased to share that Unspeakable has won Best Dramatic Series Award for 2019 at the Leo Awards. It's a prestigious Canadian film and TV awards program. So congratulations to Robert and the Unspeakable team on this incredible honor. And if you missed that interview, you can check out episode 34, and the interview starts at about the 33:20 mark. 33:20. There'll be a link in the program notes. We're getting there. Last month, NHF announced that longtime CEO Val Bias will be retiring at the end of 2019. In the e-blast that was circulated, Val was quoted as saying, "From a personal standpoint, I will always have strong ties to the bleeding disorders community. Professionally, the time has come to hire a new leader to inspire and carry the foundation forward, continuing the critical advocacy, education, and research for which the foundation has become a recognized leader." With more than 6 months to refine and execute the leadership transition plan, both Val and the board of directors will work to create a dialogue with chapter leadership, the HTCs, the Medical and Scientific Advisory Council, MASAC, and the bleeding disorders community to ensure a seamless transition to new leadership and demonstrate its unwavering commitment to the foundation's goal of finding better treatments and cures for all inheritable bleeding disorders. During the remainder of 2019, Val will be able to complete and transition many projects and initiatives. So not much to say about that, except that it's big news. 10-year CEO who is going to be retiring. There's a new leader who will be coming in. The search is underway. If you want to, again, you can Google more about this. But it's important for you to know that this is going on. If you have questions about the process and who they're looking for and what's brought about the change, I would recommend contacting your local NHF chapter, your regional chapter. Talk to leadership there and ask questions. And if you want to have a voice in the process in some way, I would say that's where to kind of direct your voice. But just be aware that that's something that's happening as well. Last but not least, in fact, you could say most important, subscribe. If you haven't already, subscribe to BloodStream on Apple Podcasts.
If you haven't already, what the heck?
Natalie's personally offended by this point. It's episode 37.
Come on.
If you're listening, you're in. Subscribe to BloodStream on Apple, Spotify, or wherever. We're everywhere. If you can find us somewhere that you like, tell us and we'll fix that. Subscribe to Ask the Expert as well for expert interviews to benefit people with bleeding disorders. And if you like what you're hearing, give us a rating on iTunes and share the episode on Facebook or wherever you can. Have a topic you want to hear, then tell us about it. We're listening. Contact us on Facebook, facebook.com/BloodStream Media, or message us on Twitter at BloodStream Info. We like to keep changing that last BloodStream Media, BloodStream Info. Take what you can
change it up.
Or email us, mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com.
Remember when you found out on my phone that I was not subscribed to Ask the Expert?
I was pretty upset about that.
Yeah.
You are now, right?
Of course I am. I hit the button right away. It was really a rocky moment in our marriage.
Yeah, well, where the honeymoon phase is over. We're in it now. All right, should we get to the like segment?
Yes, let's do it.
Welcome to this month's Like segment. Today's Like segment is brought to you by a new initiative from Sanofi Genzyme and NHF, June for Joint Health. Hey, did you know that nearly 80% of bleeds occur in your joints? And most of those bleeds go undetected, which may play a role in joint damage? Clinical studies have shown that conditioning, stretching, exercising, and the right treatment regimen can help improve joint health, reduce joint bleeds, and help resolve target joints. Balancing activity and joint health is a common struggle amongst patients with bleeding disorders, so the National Hemophilia Foundation and Sanofi Genzyme have teamed up to encourage the community to develop lifelong habits that promote safe joint-building activities, not just in June, but all year long, with June for Joint Health. This initiative is for everyone, all activities and age levels. The whole family can start habits that can help support healthy joints. As always, talk to your healthcare team before starting any physical activity. Are you interested in learning how to get active, healthy joints for you and your family? Follow #JFJH on NHF's Facebook page to get moving, and visit juneforjointhealth.org for joint health tips and events near you. That's juneforjointhealth.org. And now, on to the Like segment. Episode 37 Like segment. This doctor's recruiting an army of medical experts to drown out fake health news on Instagram and Twitter based on a May 31st article from CNBC. Natalie, who is this guy? What is he doing and why is he doing it?
This guy is Dr. Austin Chiang. He's a doctor with a passion for Instagram and Twitter. He has a unique role as the Chief Medical Social Media Officer, the
Chief Medical Social Media.
CMSMO.
Okay. Heck of a title there. Is that what his jacket says? I'm trying to read. No, it doesn't. Okay.
At Jefferson Health. His mission is to get more doctors, other health professional nurses, health advocates on social media to drown out health and misinformation. And why he wants them on social media is because people are going to social media for information. Mm-hmm. And while these other doctors are publishing in journals and, health magazines, that's not where the masses are looking for this information. So he's saying we need to go to their playground to distribute truth. Right. And because the misinformation is being distributed.
Running rampant on the playground. The playground is full of misinformation.
He's Harvard trained.
I'm sorry to stop your flow, but I like it when doctors and people who have credentials that kind of, in the eyes of your average person, automatically put them on a pedestal that I cannot necessarily claim. I like it when they say things like it's important we go to their playground, because that's why we created Stop the Bleeding 10 years ago. That's why we've created Believe. That's why we do everything we do with BloodStream. We do musical theater workshops. We do award shows, because you need to do things that people enjoy doing. You need to put things in places where people enjoy going. It is so myopic to me that these conservative institutions it's myopic and self-congratulatory that they just assume if I publish this thing, or if it's presented over here, or if it's empirically true, that it will just magically reach the masses. That has never been the case. Communication is an important skill for a reason. You need to be able to take the information and effectively communicate it to a human other than yourself, with a different ability to receive information, who uses a different vocabulary, who goes to different places for information, who's looking for that information for reasons other than academic or clinical interest, but probably because it has some actual substantive impact on their life. So by not going to the playground because, well, it's true and I did it over here and it's all well and good and who knows what's going on in that playground. It's like, I know what's going on in the playground. People run around rampant on the playground, just saying all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
So if you're choosing to not participate there, you're not getting rid of that. You're just giving that no competition. You're giving the fake BS nothing to deflate it or challenge it. You're just letting it run around.
And Dr. Chiang has recognized this. And then beyond Dr. Chiang recognizing it, because you can be someone who recognizes this and feels that it's important, but you need the buy-in of others.
Right.
So him recruiting other people with credentials and the ability to speak truth to health is very important. And then also to have someone in his position who champions him, who allows him to be the chief social media officer at Jefferson Health. So the CEO of Jefferson Health, Stephen Klasko, is also a social media user, and he has gotten behind this, and he champions Dr. Chiang's ideas to turn this boat around. Other misinformation on social media have huge followings, 2 million, 3 million followers. So we need numbers. We need numbers of other doctors who are taking the time to look into these health journals and to turn that into digestible pieces that the average person can read on social media. You know, you need the idea, you need a champion for it, and I think Jefferson Health is leading the charge in this.
So they, in terms of a call to action or what, so what does this mean, or what can you do if you are someone who's kind of interested in this idea? Dr. Chiang is also now the president of a newly formed 501c3, the Association for Healthcare Social Media, AHSM, and you can go to ahsm.org. And that organization is intended to kind of carry out this mission in a structured, systemized way. And if you look at who can join the AHSM, there's a list here that says it's including but not restricted to nurses, physicians, dentists, advanced practice professionals, physical therapists, occupational therapists, dietitians, pharmacists, psychologists, medical assistants, optometrists, podiatrists, speech language pathologists, respiratory therapists, and all other professionals to be reviewed on an individual basis. In other words, if you have a professional standing within health or health advocacy and you are interested in this, AHSM, is that right? AHSM, yeah. AHSM is interested in you. Anyone who's interested, I would say go to ahsm.org to read more about the organization, their mission, and see if it's something that you might want to participate in.
Yeah. And also if you're someone who's not participating but wants to be subscribing to social media that is based in fact, following people like Dr. Austin Chiang is a good place to start. Just starting there and then seeing who he promotes as a truth teller.
And each of these episodes, maybe as a closing thought here, gets a few thousand people who are listening to it, and some of those people are clinicians and nurses and doctors and patient advocates and people who fit this description. And some of these people also belong to institutions that are quite conservative with their communications and with their social media engagement, and they'll give you all kinds of reasons that they can't do X, Y, or Z. But I hope you, listeners, I hope you are hearing what Dr. Chiang here is saying and understand the importance of it and find ways to imagine creatively how you can participate in a more meaningful way. If this was a story that we were reading about the 1970s with newspapers being flooded with like yellow journalism and health news, we would be like, wow, that's crazy. What did they do about that? And we would be really disappointed if the answer was, well, they just kind of stayed away from it and said, we're going to go over here and put the good stuff out over here. That's not effective. And we have to translate that to something as, scary for some, I guess, as social media. End of rant.
That's great.
Thanks, Natalie. The episode 37, A Moment for Mental Health segment featuring Debbie De La Riva, is brought to you by Breaking Through. the musical and art therapy program from Believe Limited and BioMarin. You may have heard about Breaking Through's workshop and staged performance of Hemophilia the Musical last fall. By the way, Hemophilia the Musical, winner of a 2019 Sabre Award. Google it. And if you haven't, you're definitely going to want to check out breakingthroughhemophilia.com to see the video. But did you know that Breaking Through might soon be coming to you? That's right. This year, Believe Limited and BioMarin will be executing workshops on the therapeutic value of art for teens and young people at organization events around the country. To find out if Breaking Through is coming to your area, contact your local patient organization leadership. And if you are local patient organization leadership who would like to request a Breaking Through workshop, I don't know if we have any remaining this year actually to offer, but you can email us at breakingthrough@believeltd.com. That's breakingthrough@believeltd.com.
Welcome to A Moment for Mental Health, our monthly conversation that breaks down stigma and provides a safe space about things that matter. Our goal in this segment is to break mental, emotional, and behavioral health down into its various pieces, and in each episode, focus on just one or two of those pieces. Today, I'm joined by BloodStream contributor Debbie De La Riva, who is a licensed professional counselor with Mental Health Matters 2 based out of Houston, Texas. Thank you for joining us today, Debbie.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Our topic for this month is PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. And it seems like you can't go more than a day without hearing the term PTSD these days. So I was wondering if you could tell me a bit about the diagnosis and how it's showing up in the bleeding disorder community.
Yeah, you know what, Amy, I'm so excited we're talking about this because we all know that our community has gone through a traumatic experience with HIV and Hep C. And I just find it interesting that we're really diving into this. But at the same time, I think we're doing this in an amazing time because the acceptance that mental health conditions are real and we're becoming less stigmatized. People are wanting to talk about it, and that's exactly what I'm finding when I'm going around the country talking about mental health.
So what is PTSD?
PTSD is, we coined the term in the 1980s. In order to be diagnosed as having PTSD, it's someone that's had either one or many traumatic events in their life. It's somebody that even avoids any kind of stimulus that would look like the traumatic experience they went through. But the telltale signs are two of them. Number one, someone that kind of routinely re-experiences the traumatic events in flashbacks or nightmares, and they always seem to be in this hypervigilant arousal state.
And what does that include? What does that look like? The symptoms of hyperarousal, what does that look like?
Right. It's like I said, it's what we normally associate with the military because these signs and symptoms came about. We recognize them with returning soldiers. Someone having nightmares and they're irritable, trouble sleeping. Just they're always on the state of alert for a potential danger.
How prevalent is PTSD, and are we seeing it a lot in the bleeding disorder community?
Well, I wish I knew right now about the stats that we have. I've combed through a lot of research, but this is what I do know, Amy, is that maybe there's not research on PTSD itself, but we know that living with this chronic condition creates all kinds of stressors. I was listening to a mother this weekend at the Inhibitor Conference talking about the trauma that her child went through multiple, sticks for trying to access this vein. Ended up having multiple ports in and many, many stays in the hospital. And so, it's the other part of this is that, we know what we went through in our community, and now parents have these newly diagnosed kids, and they still have the images and the memories of what their loved ones went through. So we know it's 7 to 10% prevalence in the general population and 30% in the military. And it's just a matter of time before we figure out the prevalence in our community.
So what do our listeners need to know about PTSD?
The first one is just because you experience a trauma, it doesn't mean that you're most likely to have PTSD. It just increases the likelihood. What becomes super tricky is that people don't realize sometimes that what they experienced was traumatic, or they didn't really have a big reaction at that time, but later we get triggered into remembering traumatic events. Amy, it can be as innocent as a smell or by hearing something. Because you know how it is when you hear your favorite song, you might have those good feelings again and remember something good. Well, the same thing happens with the bad memories. The last thing I really want the bleeding disorder community to know is that it's not one and done, meaning that you could be triggered on several occasions, but but you can get help and you can get control over this. You just got to figure out that you have to accept the fact that this is in your life, and you have to learn the triggers.
How would our listeners know if they have PTSD, and where would they go to get help?
The best place to find out if you have PTSD is to go to a mental health professional, because they are the individuals that can talk with you and help you figure out what traumatic experience you went through and what triggers you might be living with. It's also good to go to your general practitioner. If you don't want to go to the mental health professional first, go to your GP. Tell them what you're feeling with your emotions and with your thoughts, and how that leads to all kinds of physical symptoms.
I think that's a wonderful point, because, most people have a relationship with a general practitioner and they might not have a relationship with a mental health professional. And so to go to your physician first just might seem like a good step forward to getting help.
Definitely. But I have to say, one of the things I love so much about BloodStream Media is that after the podcast is over, people can then go find out where this information is. The National Institute of Mental Health, Great Place, the National Center for PTSD, and very soon I hope to have a resource guide for our community to look for mental health resources.
And Debbie, that's a great point. Those links are going to be provided in our podcast program, and the resource guide that Debbie has written for mental health and bleeding disorders is going to be coming out this summer. And so we'll be able to unveil that for you and let you know that resource will be available. Debbie, I'm so grateful that you were on the podcast today talking about this important information. Thank you so much. And I'm so looking forward to our conversation next month.
No, and thank you so much for what you do for this community. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
And thank you once again to the segment's sponsor, Breaking Through. To learn more about the therapeutic value of art and theater and what Believe Limited and BioMarin are bringing to patient organizations around the country, visit breakingthroughhemophilia.com. One more time, that's breakingthroughhemophilia.com. Thank you again to Amy and Debbie for this month's installment for A Moment for Mental Health. Also would like to take another moment. Another moment.
Another moment.
To thank our presenting sponsor of the BloodStream podcast, Takeda. They are our presenting sponsor. They have been now for 3 years. I think this is our 3-year anniversary, actually. I'm realizing in the moment. Didn't we start? And you came in a couple episodes into the shenanigans, but I think the first episode may have been June 2016.
That sounds about right.
You know what?
Take a little peek right now?
Yeah, we're just going to have to figure this out in real time. Let's see.
We're taking more than a moment now.
Yeah, this is several moments for a good cause.
Yeah, for a sponsor who's been with us
since the beginning, and that means something. As I was saying earlier in the segment about supporting these efforts to put good stuff out on social media and build community, engage people in that way. I'm thankful for all of our sponsors, and we do work with a lot. But Takeda has been an extraordinary sponsor of Believe's work since the very beginning. There's no doubt about that. Their support of Stop the Bleeding first and foremost, and then rolled into the Teen Impact Awards and then BloodStream Media. I'm biased, obviously, but I welcome anyone to challenge. These are 3 of the most innovative programs that we have in bleeding disorders, in particular for reaching young people with valuable, important, and accurate information. And they've been committing to us for 8 years now to do this kind of work. So I mean it when I say, for all that you have done for us, Takeda, since
2016.
June 20th, 2016. That was our first episode with Dr. Glenn Pierce on the BloodStream podcast. Yeah, that's kind of wild. So anyway, for the support of everything that you have supported from BloodStream Media and Believe Limited,
thanks Takeda.
Moving into the episode 37 share segment comes to us from Tabitha White, who shares her story of becoming a hemo mom who lost her father to HIV, contracted from tainted hemophilia treatments. Let's give a listen to Tabitha White's Positively Undefined.
One of my most vivid childhood memories happened on our living room couch. I still remember sitting with my parents as they explained to 6-year-old me that my daddy was HIV positive. While I don't remember their exact words, I remember hurling myself into my mom's lap and asking if that meant my daddy was going to die. You see, as a child of a hemophiliac in the early 90s, I had already known people who had died from AIDS. In my dad's short 33 years, he made such an impact on everyone around him. I remember sitting at his funeral and being amazed at all the flowers from people around the country. One by one, people hugged me and told me how amazing he was. And he truly was. Where others saw limitations, he saw opportunities to educate and encourage. I would like to think that he passed that outlook on to me. Fast forward to the summer of 2016. I'm married to my high school sweetheart, Jason, and we have 2 beautiful girls. While we were on vacation, I realized that something wasn't quite right. After an abnormal mammogram, I was referred to a surgeon who confirmed my worst fears. I was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer at 32. This had not been in the plan for my life. But sometimes it's funny to see how God works. 3 weeks after meeting with my oncologist, I was making an appointment with another doctor, my obstetrician. Through laughter, she told me that I was 6 weeks pregnant. To say that we were surprised does not at all do justice to our emotional state. On May 2nd, 2017, the world met Caden James. We named him in honor of my dad without realizing just how much they would have in common. Within 12 hours of meeting our sweet baby, we were hit with a diagnosis: severe hemophilia A. To a mom whose dad didn't survive the tainted factor, this was soul-crushing news. In my postpartum mind, Caden had lost the genetic lottery. At our first hematology appointment, I was so overwhelmed by conversations about signs of bleeds, prophylactic dosing, port installation, helmets, and knee pads. The only thing I was certain about was that my sweet baby would never receive plasma-based factor. Our hematologist attempted to explain that this could be a viable and safe option for Caden, but my mind couldn't get past my experience with tainted factor in the 1980s. We left Caden's appointment with armloads of books filled with more information than my mind could absorb. Jason left feeling much more informed, while I felt incredibly overwhelmed. Enter our God-sent hemophilia family. My cousin is the mom of an extremely athletic teenager with severe hemophilia A. As soon as she heard that Caden had hemophilia, she reached out to me via Facebook. In her first message to me, she reassured me, "This will not define him. Your dad was one of the bravest people I knew, and Caden will be too." Those words were like healing ointment to my worn heart. No, my tears didn't stop that day, but there was a subtle shift in my outlook. When Caden was 15 months old, we reluctantly accepted the fact that it was time to schedule him for port surgery. I literally kept the reminder on my desk for 3 days before I worked up the courage to call our HTC to schedule the surgery. A few minutes after hanging up, our care coordinator called me back and said our doctor wanted us to research a new non-plasma-based therapy that was awaiting FDA approval. She told me to dig into research for 2 weeks, then we would regroup. For the full 2 weeks, I was reading everything I could get my hands on. I spoke with a representative for our area, and we attended an educational dinner. By the end of the dinner, Jason was hooked. Again, the early 90s flashed into my brain. How can we know if this is really safe? It's so new, and this is my baby boy. After lots of conversations and prayers, I eventually agreed with Jason, and we let our hematology team know that we wanted to switch. We started anxiously awaiting news announcing that the treatment had been approved for patients without inhibitors. When the news finally broke, I burst into tears. Jason and I both felt like our prayers had been answered. No, the new medication didn't cure hemophilia, but it did remove the prospect of a port. I don't think I'll ever forget how excited and proud I felt the first time I gave Caden his shot. It felt like reclaiming ground from hemophilia and doing a little more defining of this diagnosis. No, hemophilia will not negatively define Caden or our family. It's just another piece of our life. Just like AIDS didn't define my dad, severe hemophilia A will not define Caden. Right now, we're still learning his bubbly, athletic, cantankerous little self, but he's so much more than a diagnosis. And hemophilia will not define me. Yes, I'm the daughter of a hemophiliac, but I'm the daughter of Ricky. I inherited his sarcasm, determination, and drive to encourage. Yes, I'm the mom of a hemophiliac, but I'm the mom of Caden and his sisters Brinley and Cameron. Yes, our life involves weekly injections, yearly clinic visits, and remembering Caden's helmet. But it also involves love, music, sports, and more baby shark than you could possibly imagine. Even though I began as an unintentional pledge, I am now a proud member of the Hemo Mom sorority. If I can help one other mom find her superhero cape and learn that hemophilia will not define her family, it will be worth all of the tears. In the meantime, I'll watch my little guy grow and chase his own dreams with all his heart. Because after all, in our family, that's just what you do.
Thank you, Tabitha. And a reminder that you can read Tabitha's share segment story and all share segment stories from BloodStream by visiting the BloodStream blog at bloodstreampod.com / Natalie, can you guess what the / is?
Share segment stories.
No, Natalie, no.
What?
You can read the blog at bloodstreampod.com /
Blog.
Go with your first instincts. That's what it
I
is.
know. It got complicated for me.
bloodstreampod.com /
Blog.
There you go. This month's comment segment is brought to you by the Empowering Women series. This year, BloodStream Media released a special 3-episode series titled Empowering Women. Since 1999, a group of women with bleeding and clotting disorders has been gathering in Texas for a weekend of education, relaxation, and connection. In this podcast series, we take a close look at how the retreat has evolved over the last 20 years, breaking the journey down into 3 parts, from uniting to believing to empowering women. The 3-episode series is now available by clicking the Empowering Women tab on bloodstreampod.com. Again, click the Empowering Women tab on bloodstreampod.com.
This month's comment segment, Patrick takes us through an article. Clotting factors, aren't they basically all the same?
No. At least that's what Paul Clement would tell you. So this was an article in LA Kelly Communications' May 2019 issue of the Parent Empowerment Newsletter, or PEN. And Paul Clement is a regular contributor, an expert, a great writer. But I think it is still important that we appreciate, why are there 15 different products for hemophilia A? What are the differences? Are there really meaningful differences, or is this all a matter of framing and marketing? And what Paul seeks to do here is to break down what some of those differences are, which ones are meaningful and which aren't. For example, if you are taking a clotting, a factor replacement therapy, should you be taking a plasma-derived or a recombinant? A first, second, or third generation? Standard half-life, extended half-life with PEG or fusion? There's so many different questions, and Paul tackles all of those and more in this article. I want to focus on perhaps what is the most basic question when you are deciding about a factor replacement therapy: plasma-derived or recombinant. I just want to focus on what the article and a little bit of additional research brings to light about plasma-derived versus recombinant. So to start, the first commercial clotting factor concentrate for factor VIII was made available in 1968. And again, 51 years later, we have 15 different products. That clotting factor therapy was based entirely on human blood components. Proteins would be extracted from a donation, but because the concentration of factor in the blood is so small, each lot of factor was produced from pooled plasma of up to 60,000 donors.
That's a lot of donations. That's a lot of donations.
And a lot of people whose blood would be entering your system. And as Paul points out as well, the finishing stage of the production process, which we'll get into a little bit later, could ultimately result in every lot being composed of up to 400,000 unique donors. And if you're someone with severe hemophilia, you're going to be using different lots of factor over the course of a year. So you're exposing yourself to 1 million, 2 million unique donors. And if just one of them had a virus of some kind, such as HIV or hepatitis C, you as a patient could get that virus, potentially. So to combat this, in 1997, manufacturers of plasma products, they adopted what's known as QSEAL, Quality Standards of Excellence, Assurance, and Leadership. And the bottom line is they were improving the practices of plasma-derived products, the creation of biologics. But something that Paul said that I highlighted, underlined, and was like, whoa, but I know is true. Emergent viruses constantly threaten our blood supply, and it's partly a matter of luck that current viral inactivation and purification processes have successfully removed new pathogens such as West Nile, dengue fever, and others. But again, it's that emergent virus, or what I've heard Dr. Glenn Pierce from the WFH refer to as the unknown pathogen, that remains a concern, however small, for anyone taking a plasma-derived product. Recombinant products, for our purposes, and I'm referring to the third generation recombinant products, in other words, those that are most current. They're produced by mammalian or animal cells, and specifically Chinese hamster ovaries or baby hamster kidney cells, which, okay, why? Well, actually, I think you have a little information on that, don't you?
Chinese hamsters have been used in research since 1919, and in 1948, they were the first used in the United States in breeding in different research laboratories. And why Chinese hamster ovary cells have been the line of cell choice is because they have a rapid growth in suspension culture and high protein production.
So somebody figured that out, and now we're using them. And as it turns out, the factor VIII molecule, it's pretty hard to find cells that can make it, or at least make enough of it for a commercial process. But apparently these hamster cells rock. So once the cells are modified to produce factor, that process then all but eliminates the possibility of an unknown pathogen creeping into your bloodstream. Hence the claim that recombinant products are safer. I'm not making that claim. I'm just recognizing that is a claim that is made for this reason. This, of course...
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, why there's so many available clotting factors, and basically aren't they all the same? Going through breaking down, it's risk and reward, right? Like if the plasma ones come from potentially many donors, and there's that human factor and the lurking threat of the virus that we don't know exists creeping in, and then you have the recombinant factor replacement, and then we're getting away from the human element, which then could possibly be a contributing factor to inhibitors.
And you're anticipating exactly where I was going with this. So we look at the unknown pathogen component, and you ask, well, is there a place for plasma-derived products in treating hemophilia now if we have these recombinant products that eliminate that emergent pathogen or viral risk? Yes, there is a place for plasma-derived products. In fact, there was a study published only 3 years ago that seems to kind of have gotten lost in the shuffle here, called SIPIT, the Survey of Inhibitors in Plasma Products Exposed Toddlers. It was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, and the results suggested that in previously untreated patients, known as pups, it's adorable because previously untreated patients do generally mean babies, the risk of developing an inhibitor using a recombinant factor VIII product was higher than using a plasma-derived factor VIII concentrate that included von Willebrand factor. Much has been written about SIPIT. It was controversial. Some of its results were in contrast to studies such as Rodin. Of course, these studies are all differently constructed. They look at different populations. There's nuances to all of them that, give them reason to be examined a little bit more deeply than just kind of taking that surface level result. But the bottom line is it gave us reason to reconsider kind of deferring to recombinant as the standard clotting factor replacement therapy of choice, at least when it came to these babies. If we have a chance to eliminate their potential for getting an inhibitor by placing them on a plasma-derived product with von Willebrand factor, why would we not do that? Why would we go to recombinant simply because it is quote unquote the safer one? This study was challenging that, but again, it's something that I feel like kind of has gotten lost in all the conversation about non-factor replacement therapies and gene therapy. I should also mention that Dr. Glenn Pierce came on episode 1 of the BloodStream podcast to speak about all of this exactly. So if you're interested, we'll have a link in the program notes. You can listen to somebody far more expert than me say a lot of the same stuff, actually. So why might this be? One last point to discuss when it comes to recombinant versus plasma-derived. Why might it be that someone who had never received any kind of hemophilia treatment before, when they received this blood-based product with von Willebrand factor, were less likely to develop an immune response, known as an inhibitor, than somebody who took this recombinant product that had no human pieces in it? Unfortunately, the answer is we're not quite sure. One might speculate that because current recombinant products use non-human stabilizing agents, and by the way, what's that mean? Well, as best as I can understand it, and you've probably heard this before, the factor VIII molecule is fragile and it's complex, so it needs support in the form of something that is often referred to as a stabilizing agent. And in a normally functioning clotting cascade, the role of the factor VIII stabilizing agent will be, at tonight's performance, the role of the factor VIII stabilizing agent will be performed by von Willebrand factor. So given that von Willebrand factor is the body's naturally produced stabilizer of choice, is that why SIPIT found that pups using plasma-derived factor VIII therapy with von Willebrand factor had a lower incidence of inhibitor formation than those who are using recombinant products that had these animal bits in them and stuff that the body recognized more easily as foreign? Yes, maybe. Again, there's not a conclusive decision on this or a consensus decision in the medical community. There are also animal models, though, that I am inclined to point out would support this speculative claim. But all of this is to make the point that these are nuances. And I'm sure at least once you kind of glazed over during something I just said. But literally, these nuances are the difference in life-altering outcomes, especially if you're thinking about these previously untreated patients, these young pups. These are vital pieces of information to understand and discuss with your clinicians when deciding upon your treatment options, because not all clotting factors are the same. Non-factor replacement therapies won't be right for everybody, and gene therapy ain't going to be here for a while. So it's important you understand why these 25 different factor products exist and what their differences are. Again, in conclusion, the article gets into a whole host of other specifications: standard half-life, extended half-life, EHLs with PEG, recombinant factor with human cell line, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of distinctions in these products. Paul does a great job in the article of making them clear. So if this is a subject relevant to you, I would suggest checking out the latest issue of Penn, or I should say the May issue of Penn. It's the cover article from Paul Clement. And make sure that you're staying informed and asking questions if you're considering either switching a treatment product or considering what your young pup might be going on to help manage their hemophilia.
Yeah, it sounds like there's risks and rewards in all of them. And I think it's looking at the risks and rewards for whatever you're considering and seeing how they're applicable to you and your family and your life and your family's history.
Yeah, for example, I think most pediatric clinicians, hematologists, would ask, do you have a family history of hemophilia? And if you were to say yes, I'm assuming in this instance you're there with a newly diagnosed baby. Okay, and in your family history of hemophilia, is there a history of inhibitors or immune responses? Does that ring a bell? And if you were to say yes, your clinician might be inclined to want to give you more information about what Sipit found to be true about plasma-derived versus recombinant. Whereas if you were to say no, well, maybe not. Maybe it's not as relevant to you, or at least we don't have reason to be specifically sensitive to the possibility of inhibitor developing. So again, these are nuances. It can be headachy, but I honestly feel like it's the same with when we talk about insurance stuff and that. Like, this stuff is complex. You have to lean into a certain amount of it and kind of wrestle with some of these nuances so that you can accurately weigh the risk reward as it pertains to your specific situation, because it's different for everybody and there's not a clear cut. As much as we want one, I feel like we say this all the time, as much as we want one, there's just not a clear cut answer.
And Paul does a great job of breaking it down. Thanks for bringing this to us, Patrick.
And thank you again to the segment sponsor, Empowering Women. You can listen to the new 3-part series by visiting BloodStreamPod.com and clicking on the Empowering Women tab, on BloodStreamPod.com. All right, joining me now for the episode 37 interview segment is Amanda Bach, the CEO of the European Hemophilia Consortium, or the EHC. Amanda, hello, how are you?
Hi, Patrick. I'm well. I'm happy to be here.
I'm going to start with something that might embarrass you, which is why I didn't tell you I was going to do this before we started recording, which is I'm going to read your bio off the EHC website because I think it's quite interesting and will provide good context for this conversation. You've been with the EHC in this capacity since late 2012. Amanda first became involved with hemophilia when she joined the WFH in 2009. Prior to that, she focused her efforts on international humanitarian and human rights issues, particularly child rights in the times of armed conflict. Amanda worked for the International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, in Geneva and in New York. She first helped coordinate the delivery of humanitarian aid with the United Nations agencies in Geneva. Later, she represented the ICRC in meetings and negotiations of the UN General Assembly and the Security Council in New York. She also worked for the European Commission's Humanitarian Aid Office, a Brussels-based think tank, Friends of Europe, and a U.S. regional newspaper. Born in Bolivia, Amanda grew up in Colombia, Mexico, and the United States, Switzerland, and the Netherlands. She has a German passport and speaks English, French, Spanish, German, and Dutch. My goodness, Amanda, that's exhausting to even think about. She has a master's degree in environment and development from the London School of Economics and Political Science and a bachelor's degree in international relations and English literature from Austin College in the U.S. All right, Amanda, that is quite an impressive resume. And is that 5 languages? French, Spanish, German, Dutch, English. That's 5 languages, right?
Yeah, sorry.
Don't be sorry. I'm sorry I speak 1. Sometimes I feel proud of myself because I'll reach back and I'll use a word that I haven't had to use since standardized testing days 20 years ago. And I'll think, wow, I'm a real articulate wordsmith of a guy. And then I read, speaks English, Spanish, French, German, Dutch. And I go, okay, never mind. I just have the 1.
Well, if it makes you feel better... If it makes you feel better, the more languages you speak, the worse you're at each of them.
Okay. All right. I'll just keep that in mind then, and I'll use that to calm my anxiety. But I have to ask just before we get started, an impressive array of just resume background items there, all of which kind of logically play into the work that you're doing now in one way or another. But I am curious, in 2009, how was it that the WFH first came upon your radar and bleeding disorders first entered your radar?
So it's really, that starts with the International Committee of the Red Cross, which is part of the Red Cross family that specializes in armed conflict, which is really what I studied. But the perhaps not well known fact is that the Red Cross is a movement of various parts, and the ICRC only being one of its parts, the other parts being the National Red Cross societies like the American Red Cross, obviously. And those national societies have an umbrella organization, much like NHF is an umbrella for your national chapters, or EHC is an umbrella for our national patient organizations. And that federation collaborates with ICRC in armed conflict because they do development and ICRC does armed conflict. So often they go hand in hand, and those are the on the ground partners in the delivery of humanitarian aid in times of armed conflict. And so the movement of the Red Cross is a family, and parts of it are involved in blood donation, as you probably know, and your listeners are probably familiar with. So really, when I got a child of my own, my first child, my son was born in New York, we made the decision that armed conflict was probably not the best context in which to raise a family. And it's through the Red Cross family that I was directed to this organization called the World Federation of Hemophilia, based in Montreal, and encouraged to apply. And so that's really how that connection came to be.
And did you find that transition was one that kind of satisfied as a parent in the life stage that you were at? I guess this is maybe obvious. 10 years later, you're the CEO of EHC, so it appears as though it was the correct decision. But did you find it did satisfy what you were looking for at that stage?
I did, and I do more and more as the years go by, for two reasons. The first reason being that I really, as you can kind of deduce from my CV, I grew up in an international environment. I'm very, it's quite my ethic to work collaboratively, globally, and across regions. And so I was looking for that kind of organization to devote my energy to. And so the WFH ticked that box. And the other thing that surpassed my expectations, actually, in hemophilia, and maybe one of the reasons that you've fallen in love with the community and become so addicted to the space, is that when you come from a world of humanitarian aid, you're helping people, but you're often helping people that are not agents of their own change, because you're helping them at their most vulnerable. And you don't find actors with whom to collaborate. You're really serving a population that's oftentimes a passive recipient. And it was refreshing to me to come into the hemophilia space and find so many patients with bleeding disorders that are active in their space, that are volunteers, that are often experts in their field, that know much more than you know, and to work in partnership and collaboratively and together. And I still learn so much from volunteers. And it's I think mutually empowering to have staff and volunteers collaborating next to each other, and the symbiosis that it can create can be quite fruitful. So I've really enjoyed that, and it was the discovery I fell in love with when I joined WFH.
So speaking about that mix of staff and volunteers and the synergy that can be created, we're moving into talking about kind of structures and organization and leadership thinking. So let's talk a little about the EHC in general. You made reference to how it might, for many of our listeners in the U.S., be comparable to NHF in the way that NHF represents the chapters located across the states of the U.S. and is the national umbrella organization. The EHC representing the various member organizations throughout Europe and is an umbrella organization in that right. Although I am sure there are some not so small differences, given that the EHC is representing various countries as opposed to different states within the same country and federal government. But as best as possible with a U.S. audience in mind, perhaps, can you give us an overview of the EHC today and talk a little about some of the recent growth that you've experienced, and if there are a couple of programs or initiatives that you'd like to highlight?
I'll tackle the first question first, in terms of maybe the differences and the similarities. I think there are more similarities than one might think of immediately off the bat. because of your federal state structure and a lot of the devolved powers at state level. It's not so dissimilar in Europe. When you talk about Europe, I think it's important, particularly from an EHC perspective, I think it's important to flag two things. There's the European Union, which has 28 members, and there's the Council of Europe, which is a completely different organization with a different mandate, membership structure, etc., a different raison d'être, really. But it has far more members. It has something like 47 members. And the EHC, our membership covers the Council of Europe countries and beyond, in fact. So one thing I want to say from the start is we do not only represent EU member states, and that's one of our challenges, because on the other hand, we are established in Brussels, and the EU is our most logical advocacy counterpart. And the EU is what is similar to NHF in the sense that it has member states, and those member states have devolved some of their decision-making to the EU institutions. In healthcare, it's interesting because healthcare is a competency that has stayed with member states. So the EU institutions have traditionally had very little legal leeway in terms of affecting health. But in some spaces, notably in the rare disease space, as hemophilia is a rare disease, sheerly by economy of scale, the EU institutions have taken up a little bit of that leadership. And there are a lot of initiatives coming out of the EU institutions on rare diseases because of that leadership that member states have to some extent accepted and welcomed, because they have such few numbers of rare diseases nationally, and it makes sense to partner at an EU level. So we are quite involved with policy setting and with standard setting, and the kind of relationship, I would say, national EU relationship that you might find between a state and a federal level in the US. And then there's a slightly different interaction happening with the Council of Europe, which is, and I'll spare you the details, the Council of Europe is primarily a human rights organization, but it has a department called the European Directorate for the Quality of Medicines in Healthcare, which houses what's called the pharmacopoeia and the legal basis for the pharmacopoeia. And so it's a natural home to everything healthcare standards related. And we've been collaborating with that organ of the Council of Europe for as long as I've been here. And that's very helpful from an advocacy perspective. Again, maybe relating it back to the state and federal level, because most of our members are members of the Council of Europe. And so they have representatives from their national governments at the Council of Europe signing off on resolutions. So how beautiful is it to have your patient data and your, patient voices feeding into standardization recommendation processes within the Council of Europe, which then gets signed off in resolutions by representatives of the member states, enabling our patient organizations to go back to their national governments saying, well, guess what? Your government has already endorsed this. And that might be a little similar as well with the state-federal dynamic to some extent. It's a long answer. I hope it's made sense.
Yeah, no, it does make sense. And I think hearing you explain it that way, it does sound as though there may be more similarities than even I was aware of in that state and federal level. And as you put it, the way the powers are dissolved through the chain and the interaction between the state and federal, as well as other bodies that set the standards that you collaborate with along the way. It actually sounds structurally like it's more similar than perhaps I thought. And I'm curious to talk a little more about the relationship between EHC and NHF and other international partners. But I'm wondering, I mentioned the growth earlier based on our emails back and forth that EHC has experienced. And if you could speak a little to that and to the initiatives that perhaps are amongst the priorities EHC has in 2019.
Sure, yes. So the EHC was founded 30 years ago. We're celebrating our 30th anniversary this year. We actually turned 30 in April. But it's
happy birthday, EHC.
Thank you. But the EHC, as people know it today, is really the product of a massive metamorphosis we've undergone in the last 7 years. So it's really since 2012 that we've redesigned in many ways the organization. We haven't touched the mission. The mission's always stayed the same, but we've massively grown programming, involvement, engagement, the volunteer base, the funding base. We went from a staff of one part-time office administrator to staffing of 8. We went from a budget of under 200,000 to 6 times that. So it's been busy, put it that way. And we've created a lot of framework programs that are very much focused on advocacy. We are exclusively focused on advocacy, but we take a bird's eye view of what advocacy is. So we do advocacy in substance, we do it in form, and we do it into the future. And those really are the 3 pillars that explain the framework of our action and our programming. And so what this means is that we do a lot of content. We do our own data collection every year. We publish it in peer-reviewed journals. We write a lot of our own analyses. So we have a quarterly European policy report that goes out to our members. We've launched a new products newsletter, which is available on our website, which gives an update to the public, in fact, of all the pipeline products that are coming down and will soon be available to patients, and really lays it out what to be considered, etc. So we do a huge amount of education. For instance, we have the first gene therapy educational films that we launched last fall that are on our website. And so that's a lot of the substance. And then we do advocacy in form, which means that it's a lot of the technical skills. So how to advocate. And Mark Skinner once said at a conference not too long ago that we really have to update how we do advocacy, and I couldn't agree more with him. It's no longer the lobbyist that stands outside the minister's office and tries to get in and make a case. It's much more patient involvement in decision making at all levels of decisions. And so to be able to do that, you really have to equip patient representatives with the skills needed for those individual rooms, for those individual decision making tables, to equip them to not only understand the stakeholder across the table from them, but speak the same language. And so that means that we do a lot of economics training. We do a lot of training on health technology assessments and how to engage in them. We do a lot of training on the procurement of treatment products and what payers look at and how they make decisions, and how to weigh in with added value in a way that helps the decision makers frame their own thinking around these decisions. And so that's the part that's in form. And so we do that on policy level, we do it on payer level, we do it on all of these technical levels. And we invest hugely into the future part of that pillar, because there's no point having excellent patient advocates today if we don't have excellent patient advocates tomorrow. And you probably know as well as I that the best patient advocates that we have in this space, in fact, the best patient advocates in any disease space, have been born out of adversity. And currently we're victims of our own success. Luckily, in many Western countries, we no longer have the same adversity. That's not true for everyone. We still have underserved and underrepresented groups, women in bleeding disorders, inhibitors, other rare bleeding disorders, platelets, etc. We have, if you're looking at a global level, obviously 75% of the population globally does not have access to treatment and care. But in countries such as yours, or the one that I'm based in Western Europe, organizations are struggling to find volunteers. And if they're struggling to find volunteers, they're going to struggle to find patient advocates. And if we lose that advocacy voice, we're going to face an erosion of everything that the generation before us has done, which we really don't want to see. So we really have to invest into the future, and we have to invest in making sure that our advocacy stays relevant to the future advocates. We can't even, hoping to fit a young patient advocate into the model of advocacy that we've known so far is not going to work. So we invest heavily in youth leadership. We have a consolidated youth leadership strategy that does not stop. It's not a one-stop shop. It doesn't stop with a workshop. It starts with a workshop. And then we take our alumni through a whole continuum of other events at the leadership conference, and we invite them to debate on stage at our EHC conference. And we've created youth fellowship program grants for them so that they can actually get money from the EHC to go off and do what they want to do, what's important to them across borders. So we're really trying to invest in the community building. And in that sense, we've grown a lot of programs. We have 14 events this year.
I've said before, I don't know on this podcast or not, but and I forget if I've shared this with you, but my work in this, obviously as a person with hemophilia, I have a particular interest in the space, but it was losing my brother at 18 in part because of complacency with self-care that I was activated in this way. And what that started me thinking about was we had a contamination crisis. But now my concern is that the potential exists for a complacency crisis. So this was going back in 2010 and 11, and that was my goal with the content that I was creating was to try to create new pathways for engagement so that people like my brother and others who weren't currently connecting with existing outreach efforts and engagement efforts would have these new pathways that were entertainment fronted to engage with, because it's to the point that you were making earlier about the upside of strife and conflict is that it unites people and it creates advocacy power, and it creates a sense of urgency, and it creates a receptive audience for people that we often need to ally with, legislators and lawmakers, because of that urgency and that expressed urgency. However, when we get healthier, taking the eye off the metaphorical ball becomes too easy. So it resonates to hear you say we need to be engaging young leaders on the advocacy issues that motivate them with an eye toward the future in order to ensure that we're going to continue to have leadership, that we're going to continue to have advocates, that we're going to continue to have volunteers as we're moving into a very interesting period of time, as we know, with the therapies that are being worked on and gene therapies advancing through clinical trials. Congratulations, by the way, on the first Women's Bleeding Disorders Conference that I know just passed only a couple weeks ago, if that, right? We're fresh on the heels of that conference. How was that?
Yeah, thank you. It was momentous. We knew it would be well received by many women in our community, but we didn't expect the outpouring of gratitude, validation, respect, just the outpouring of relief at being heard, the community building, the vibe in the room was momentous, historic in many ways. I've been to a lot of conferences, but I left feeling elevated, and I left feeling outraged, and I left feeling mobilized, and I think everybody else did as well. It was the first international Women in Bleeding Disorders conference anywhere. I think this goes back to the changing landscape and the future of advocacy. We have a lot of women in our space, be they carriers, be they siblings, be they carers, be they women that themselves have hemophilia when no one recognizes that, or women that have another bleeding disorder that no one else talks about. We've really gone from a lifetime of goodwill relationships. We've really seen goodwill relationships with the women in our space. And we need to take that community of people that have supported hemophilia patients, male hemophilia patients, to a community that is interested in them as well, a community that has mutual passion for their issues as well. It's not just about listening to them, it's about being willing to change, to make them feel included. They deserve it. And they have labored, and they have advocated, and they have been on the front lines for men with hemophilia. And I can think of more than one female patient president in Europe that doesn't even have hemophilia or is related to anyone that has hemophilia who's been president of the Hemophilia Association, that not only institutions like the EHC make space for them, but that all patient organizations and male members of patient organizations make space for them and not feel threatened by it, and welcome that dialogue and look at their issues. And I can say I finished a whole notebook at the conference because I wrote down so many things I didn't know. The things that women face in terms of diagnosis, in terms of psychosocial, in terms of barriers to access to treatment, barriers to access to care. There's so much to talk about. And I definitely think we should all be talking about it.
Well, there's a theme of the changing face of advocacy that seems to be emerging over the course of this dialogue, and I'm interested in this subject of the unmet needs of the subsets of our greater population, and in particular, women with bleeding disorders. And we just actually released a 3-part series called Empowering Women here on BloodStream, based on a women's conference here in the U.S. So we are cognizantly and actively trying to contribute to that culture of amplifying the voices of women in the community and their challenges, and trying to just play a meaningful role in that. All that being said, so we share, headspace there. I do also wonder. Let me give you an example of a point I want to make. So we're currently in production right now for our web series Stop the Bleeding. And this year, Stop the Bleeding, it's about a fictional nonprofit organization serving bleeding disorders. This year, they go down to Mexico to twin with a treatment center and patient organization in Mexico. And that allows us across the 10 episodes to put a spotlight on issues that Mexico is facing, and Mexico as representative of Central America and developing countries in general. So that's what we're doing this season with Stop the Bleeding. My team has become so sensitive to all of the different populations and pockets within bleeding disorders that when I was looking at initial drafts of scripts, every patient that we met in the Mexican HTC was a girl with hemophilia. And I eventually had to say to them, I am so thankful that our gender split 50-50 writing staff is all kind of paying attention to this stuff. But I need you to give me boys with hemophilia at the age of 10, 11, or 12, because if they're diagnosed after age 11, they can't be on low-dose prophylaxis. And that's a major issue in Mexico. So as much as I want to be inclusive and appreciate that we're broadening the tent even as we go into a developing country in our fictional show here, we need to keep the priorities on the ground in mind and not overlay our priorities in the U.S. Now, that being said, I don't want to shun the storytelling of women with bleeding disorders in Mexico and in developing countries, but there is that game of prioritization because you can only accomplish so much at any given time, and I know you know that. So I'm just curious, based on that little example, do you struggle at all with how do we do everything we can to support education about gene therapy and novel therapies, amplifying and supporting the advocacy efforts of women in our community without losing sight of, say, there's just the other components of our community and things such as the SIPET article, the SIPET study from a few years ago. We just talked about this earlier on the podcast, and how when it came out, as I'm sure you remember, it was a big deal because of the indications that it seemed to articulate and how those were contrary to some previous studies on inhibitor development. And it led to an interesting conversation about plasma and recombinant in 2016. And I feel as though since Hemlibra entered the space and gene therapies moved further along, we've kind of lost sight of those types of conversations. So this is very long-winded, but I guess this is my long wind-up as to say, how do you both prioritize unmet needs, such as people with inhibitors, women with bleeding disorders, while also just kind of keeping an eye on that big picture and making sure that all ships are moving forward?
The way that I try to think about it personally, or the way the HC also try to approach it, is, first of all, there's an element of language, and second of all, there's an element of opportunity. So what struck me as really interesting, for instance, at the Women's Conference, is the proposal someone made that we shouldn't be talking about hemophilia treatment centers. We should be talking about hemostasis treatment centers. And the fact that, as was testified to in the Women in Bleeding Disorders documentary that we launched at the conference, that in Serbia, for instance, one of the speakers was saying when she has a bleed, she can't go to the hemophilia treatment center because it's for hemophilia. She has to go to the emergency room. So already there's an element of, we don't need to be splitting our efforts between this binary he-she model. We could just be saying, everybody come, it's to the hemostasis center, for instance. We try to listen to what the community needs and be quick about making it happen. And we would not be able to do what we do with the 8 staff that we have. It's impossible. It's the volunteer base that grows every year that is able to carry this. And so much of the Women Bleeding Disorders Conference was put together by the Women Bleeding Disorders Committee, who are just fantastic, and the members of the Medical and Scientific Advisory Group, who are also fantastic, that were really brought together the thought pieces, brought together the content, proposed the speakers, etc. An element of, if we offer them the tools, they will do it. I think, in places like Mexico, I've lived in Mexico. I grew up in Mexico and in Colombia, and I was born in Bolivia. The problem there is, I understand you have to prioritize the boy in your fictional film, and that's what resonates with a lot of the audiences, etc. But if you do that, the girl with hemophilia is 20 years down the line, and we're in 2019. There's an element of not choosing, just widening. Let's doing it together. Well, there are 2 separate things. Let's start with Hemlibra and other novel products that are coming down the pipeline. I would say extended half-life products were the first novelty that we welcomed in the space. Hemlibra is a huge second novelty, but there are more to come. We're looking forward to all options. We think patients should have options, not just different patients, but also the same patients at different parts of their lives. I think that is also something we should be prioritizing for all patients. Coming from the humanitarian aid space, I take a slightly different view to many others in our field, because I come from a place of, it's not about saving lives per se, it's about saving dignity. And the quality of life conversation that we hear a lot in our space resonates with me a little bit from that perspective, because patients don't just want to survive, they want normalcy. They want to be able to do the things that their peers do, and they want a normal type of life. For me, it's a lot about preserving their dignity. And I think that only happens when you give them choice. That's my take on novel products. I think we should be welcoming them all. And if I can segue back to SIPIT, which I think was a hugely important piece of work by some brilliant minds, which I don't think was received the way it should have been received when it was first launched. It is a randomized clinical trial in a world where, honestly, that's the golden standard. I think that's also part of the debate and part of the patient education and part of the choice, because it's not just where you are in your life, or if we're talking about SIPIT, where a parent is in their community with the diagnosis, in deciding what to do with a previously untreated patient and how to make the informed decisions and choices. And there is space for all products. There's space for plasma-derived, there's space for recombinant. It's a matter of choice, and it depends on the context. It depends on the environment, the doctors. It depends on that family's exposure to hemophilia in their lifespan. Are they newly diagnosed or not? Can their healthcare system afford ITI if necessary or not? And it's, I think, part of informed decision-making to really put all of these issues on the table and have a dialogue and debate, and not say one thing is better than another thing. I think we should just lay down scientific research, and its validity should stand. We should lay down some of the judgment, bring in more education, informed decision-making, and keep choice, and not be so paternalistic about it. If we widen the educational space and we widen the conversation, people can make informed decision-making, and then can change their decisions, they can change their choices based on new discoveries, based on information, then they should be able to.
So I appreciate those ideas, and I hear them reflected in a few of the topics we've woven in and out of. And I'm glad that we were able to come back to something like SIPIT, which I agree was so important, and yet does feel as though it's kind of slipped through the conversation a little bit, because there is just so much going on. We could continue doing this for quite some time, but I need to let you return to your life. So I will say thank you for your time. This was really interesting. I learned some stuff, and I'm certain then that listeners did as well.
That's great. And thanks so much for your interest in our work and for your time. I think it's an exciting space we're in, the changing face of advocacy, absolutely. But I think it's also the changing faces of advocates, and empowering them to be the future I think it's an exciting time, not just in the drug development space, but in our community space. So if you're in Europe, don't hesitate to come by and say hello.
All right, deal. Well, thank you again, Amanda Bach.
Thank you, Patrick. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Moving into Mama Sue's Netflix Rex, but before we do that, one more time, a big thank you to the presenting sponsor of the BloodStream podcast, Takeda. Thanks, Takeda. And thanks, Mama Sue, for being back once again with another installment of Netflix Rex. Hi, Mom.
Hello there. How are you?
I'm well. How are you doing on this fine Sunday?
Oh, I'm having a beautiful day. It's beautiful here in New York.
Mom, tell people what we did last Sunday.
We went to see Billy Joel at the Garden, and he was fantastic.
What have you thought about the most since last Sunday, or told people about the most since then?
I think I knew every song that he played. It was a sold-out performance. You know, and I did notice, I had never seen him before, so I did notice, like, he's not really a stage performer. He's not like a Mick Jagger jumping around. He was at the piano most of the time. But I felt his voice has really held up for someone 70 plus. He seems to really enjoy it. And I don't know, it was a great crowd. You know, there was people your age there, of course. I just found it fantastic and entertaining, and I loved it all. I loved it. Everything I hoped for and more.
Billy Joel at the Garden, playing once a month until he says I'm done. I guess.
Till
I guess that's how long.
Stops selling out, then he'll stop.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. Selling out does tend to keep things going. All right. So what's our first one? Our first one up today is a scripted feature film. We haven't done too many of those. What's the scripted feature film you want to talk about?
I saw Green Book. I did have to pay for it. I had to pay $6, but it was money well spent. I never, ever use pay-per-view because there's so much available that's included on Amazon and Netflix, but it had been recommended to me. The title, you know, of course I heard of it. It won the Academy Award. But the title just didn't appeal to me. It didn't make me want to investigate it, but it was recommended. And basically what it's about, it's set in the 60s, and it's about a concert pianist, an African-American concert pianist who has a Italian-American driver taking him on his tour. I won't tell you why it's called Green Book. Maybe some people know. I felt I knew a little too much about it, so I don't want to say too much. It's just fantastic. It's based on a true story, which I love, about the true concert pianist whose name was Don Shirley. He was played by an actor called Mahershala Ali, and the driver was played by an actor named Viggo Mortensen. He played the part of Frank Vallelonga. I didn't know either of these actors, but they were both fabulous. I recommend it.
Excellent. You weren't familiar with Viggo Mortensen prior to this movie either?
No, I was not. No.
Oh, cool. It's interesting. You know, there's certain actors and films where you think an actor might kind of be universally known, but until they reach certain films or just get themselves in front of certain audiences, you wouldn't necessarily know who they are. Yeah, he's been a player of sorts for a while, but Green Book reached a level that very few movies do. So of course he hasn't done anything that's reached quite this level before.
And what about the other actor, Mahershala Ali? Did you know him?
Yeah, but just from the last few years. So he gained notoriety or fame, I should say, from Moonlight, because he won Best Supporting Actor for Moonlight, and then he was just in the most recent season of True Detective, and he's kind of having his moment now. So I was aware of him, but only from the last few years. Well,
I highly recommend it to everybody. It made me laugh. It made me tear up. It was an excellent movie.
So we watch Green Book. We have a good laugh. We have a good tear. Where can we go to next if we need a little bit of a palate cleanser, a little bit of a break, something different? What else can we watch, Mom?
Well, another one I watched, which I really liked, on Amazon. It's called Your Inner Fish. It's a PBS show. It's from a few years ago. It has 3 episodes: Your Inner Fish, Your Inner Reptile, and Your Inner Monkey. And this scientist, his name is Shubin, he wrote a book. And so this series is based on his book. And basically, which I actually never thought of, we actually have a lot in common with the fish, and we came from a fish. Like, we're all pretty much in agreement that we came from monkeys or mammals, but we actually came from a fish. 375 million years ago, a fish made its way out of the ocean, and the fins over many millions of years grew into paws and eventually grew into hands. And I found it was really really a great 3-part series. I would recommend it.
You're in a fish, you're in a reptile, and you're in a monkey. How long? Each one's about an hour, it looks like.
Yeah, a little less than an hour each. And it's just really interesting about, first we were fish, then we were amphibians, then we were reptiles, mammals, primates. And one thing that's interesting, which I don't know anyone after your age who doesn't have back issues, and they didn't quite find out when the first monkey or ape left the trees and why did they straighten up. The theory was that they stood up straight because there was a climate warming and the trees all died, so they had to leave the trees and they came down. But then that was kind of disproven, and they don't know why the early primates that we are our ancestors, why they stood up. But the fossils they've found from those early transitional species, they all have bad backs. They all have sciatica. They all had scoliosis, kind of the same things we all have, because the spine is actually better to go on. The spine was designed to walk on all fours. So when we first stood up, it's actually a lot of pressure on that thin spinal column to have all that weight. It's not as dispersed when you're on all fours. I found that interesting.
Yeah, that makes sense when you say it like that. It's interesting.
Yeah, and that's very good. This scientist is very excited and he's very passionate, and it's very easy to understand. It makes a lot of sense. And I think if anyone's interested in our ancestors, they would like it.
Okay. All right, that's a good one. So your Inner Fish, the 3-part series on Amazon, is the second recommendation. And then lastly, what's our third recommendation for the month?
Third one I watched was so heartwarming. It's on Netflix, called Life in the Doghouse. And these two wonderful men, one's name is Danny, one's name is Ron, and the name of their rescue is Danny Ron's Rescue. Years ago, back in 2000, these two men are horse trainers. And back in 2005, when Katrina happened, and all the animals, if you recall, were not welcome in the shelters had all they could do to take the people. So he sent a few of his horse trailers down, he and his friend, to bring the dogs to South Carolina where he is. And that's where it all started. And he said that he's the only known rescue where he actually lives in the house with his dogs. They're in his home. They're not outside in a kennel. And at the making of this movie, he had 71 animals in his house. And you just see, and his house is immaculate. He has a whole team of cleaners. I keep saying it's the two men that do it. Spend all their retirement money on it. They take loans on their house. It's not a particularly big house. And it was just, they're such great, wonderful people. And they, of course, go to the kill shelters to try to take dogs that are adoptable. I mean, you feel so good watching this. You get to know the dogs and the family and the home, and they have a wonderful life. And they run strictly on donations. So, of course, after I watched it, I had to make a little donation.
Well, you got to keep them going. How else are they going to survive?
Oh, yeah. It's really a feel-good show. I highly recommend it.
All right. Well, that's good. It sounds like those are 3 good options so that we don't get too high or low with Green Book. We don't get too freaked out about being a monkey. And then we can have a nice cathartic experience with our 2 friends, Life in the Doghouse. You also are quite excited about the Downton Abbey movie that's coming out. We saw the trailer together last week.
I am so excited. As I talked about it on this podcast, I am so thrilled that it's coming September 20th, and I will be there.
I didn't know if we were going to need drugs or something. Every sentence of the preview, Mom, I can't wait. When is it? September? I can't wait for September. And it's like, Mom, we're going to have it. It's like a medical event occurring, Mom. We're going to be okay.
I'm telling you, I told you before, it was the best thing I've ever seen in my 60 years.
I'm sure we'll be talking more about that come the fall. Is there anything else going on with you in June you want to let listeners know about? Anything you're watching or doing as we move into the summer?
I haven't really thought about what I'm going to be watching now because I actually just finished watching The Doghouse, so I haven't looked forward, but I'll try to be diverse and pick a couple of things that everybody will be interested in.
Well, I very much enjoyed going to Billy Joel with you last weekend, and I enjoyed seeing the Elton movie. That was good as well.
It's very good. I recommend that 100%.
That's where we saw the Downton Abbey trailer, and now we've got 3 good recommendations for June, and we'll talk to you again next month to see what you got in store for us for July.
All righty, very good. See you then. I'll talk to you then.
Thanks, Mom.
Bye.
And now finally it's time for parting shots. One last shot to leave the audience with bleeding disorders related or not. Natalie, what's your parting shot for June?
So it's June and it's summer. Well, at the end of the month, officially summer solstice, the 21st. But, for summer's sake, Memorial Day to Labor Day, we're in it now,
We're in
right?
it now. Yeah, this is good. This is summer.
So summer reading is a thing.
It is.
And people like reading, at the beach, if you're so lucky to go, and just, even in the backyard on a lounge chair. So
There's so many places you can read. Under a tree, by a bee.
I mean, it's a time of year that's nice to lean into the leisure activity of reading.
It's true.
So a book that I'm reading right now is How to Break Up with Your Phone. And I love it. It's quirky and cute, but it also goes into the science of our collective societal addictions to our phone, and the interesting aspect of if you were to replace phone using with any other compulsive activity, people would be so aghast.
Right.
But that the same neurological responses and pathways are being dug into our brain of, there's an opening, the book opens with a breakup letter essentially, and it's really adorable, but it was even an activity that I didn't think we'd do together, go to the bathroom, now seems impossible to think about being in the bathroom without you.
Right.
A once former private moment that we've learned to share exclusively with each other, and just the truly compulsive nature we have to checking our phones, and why it's actually quite terrible for us. That all makes sense. There's also a quiz at the beginning that I don't know who you are if you can get a low score on it, because I had such a terrible score. And I feel like I'm someone who's decent with my phone use.
Oof, that's bad. That's like when we look up what obese means and you're like, holy crap, that's obese? It's only at that mark? Oh, man.
But yeah, I'm someone who tries to lend a little bit of mindfulness, keeping it plugged in. And you've started habits of not having it by your bedside at night, putting it in your office and using an actual alarm clock. And the book talks about how small things like that have huge impacts. It should not be the last thing you touch before going to bed, and it should not be the first thing you touch waking up. It's a hilarious and well-written and interesting book, and I'm only part of the way through, so maybe I'll touch next month of my thoughts on the end, but it's a good summer read.
Breaking up with your phone?
I believe it's How to Break Up with Your Phone.
How to Break Up with Your Phone.
But
Okay.
yeah, what's your parting shot?
July 2nd is my late brother Adam's birthday, but I bring that up only because I have always been aware that July 2nd is also, in a non-leap year, the exact middle day of the year. It's right smack in the middle of your 365-day year, which means that you're coming up on halfway through 2019, which is nuts, but that's also true. So, if you fell off resolutions that felt important to you 6 months ago, or if you just want an excuse to decide I'm using this moment in time to make a meaningful shift in this or that or the other thing, July 2nd, halfway through the year, you still have, if you're listening to this close to the release date anyway, you still have more than half the year to determine what 2019 has been for you. So we often use New Year's as an opportunity to kind of jumpstart our whatever. Well, why not use the exact middle day of the year to do the exact same thing and sprint your way toward the finish? July 2nd, middle day of the year. What's the rest of 2019 going to look like for you? And that is all for this episode. Special thanks to everyone at Believe Limited, the National Hemophilia Foundation, Entertainment to Effect Change, the Hemophilia Alliance, the European Hemophilia Consortium, and our presenting sponsor, Takeda, as well as our segment sponsors, Sanofi Genzyme, Breaking Through, and Empowering Women. Thanks as well to our segment contributors, Debbie De La Riva, Tabitha White, Amanda Bach, Amy Board, and Mama Sue Lynch. Subscribe to the BloodStream podcast and the Ask the Expert podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, or wherever you listen to Actually, just subscribe to all of them everywhere. I don't care if you listen or not. Just get those numbers up. Subscribe to BloodStream anywhere you find it. I don't care if you listen or not. Leave us everyone knows it's true. Leave us ratings, share our show, and help spread that word. You can email us at mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com. You'll also find BloodStream on facebook.com/bloodstreammedia and on Twitter @bloodstreaminfo. Reminder to check out the program notes for this episode in your podcast player or on bloodstreampod.com for links and additional information about the various stories featured on this episode. My name is Patrick James Lynch.
And I'm Natalie Lynch.
And until next time, take self-care of yourself. Bye, everybody.